The fluorescent lights of the small-town hospital flickered slightly, casting an eerie glow over the room. Lucas stood by the bedside of his childhood friend, Daniel, whose breathing was shallow and labored. The beeping of the heart monitor filled the silence, each sound a painful reminder of the inevitable. "Lucas," Daniel whispered, his voice barely audible. Lucas leaned in closer, his heart heavy with grief. Promise me you'll take care of Mariana." Lucas swallowed hard, his throat tight. He had known Daniel since they were kids, inseparable through thick and thin. Seeing his friend in this state was almost unbearable. "I promise," Lucas replied, his voice steady despite the turmoil inside. He gripped Daniel's hand, feeling the weakening pulse. "I'll take care of her. I swear." A faint smile crossed Daniel's lips, and he gave a small nod. "Thank you," he murmured before his eyes closed, and the beeping of the monitor became a continuous tone. Lucas stood there, frozen, as the nurse entered the room and checked Daniel's vitals. She looked up at Lucas and shook her head. "I'm sorry," she said softly. He nodded, releasing Daniel's hand and stepping back. The weight of the promise he had just made settled heavily on his shoulders. He knew Mariana, Daniel's younger sister, but not well. She was always the quiet one, staying in the background while Daniel and Lucas had their adventures. As he left the hospital, the cold night air hit him, a stark contrast to the warmth of the room he had just left. The town was silent, the streets empty, as if mourning the loss of one of its own. Lucas walked home, his mind racing with thoughts of how he would fulfill this promise. He couldn't shake the image of Daniel's pleading eyes from his mind. When he reached his small, modest house, he sat on the porch steps, staring out into the darkness. The promise he had made was not just a commitment, it was a bond that tied him to Mariana's fate. He had no idea what challenges lay ahead, but he knew one thing for certain: he would keep his word, no matter what it took. As the first light of dawn began to break over the horizon, Lucas stood up, a sense of resolve hardening within him. He would meet Mariana and start this new chapter in both their lives. For Daniel, and for the promise he had made. The next morning, Lucas felt the weight of his promise even more acutely. The morning sun cast long shadows across his small house as he prepared to meet Mariana. He had called her earlier, briefly explaining that they needed to talk about Daniel. She had agreed to meet him at the local diner, a neutral place where they could discuss things without the looming presence of Daniel's memory. Lucas arrived at the diner early, taking a seat by the window. He watched as people went about their morning routines, the normalcy of it all contrasting sharply with the turmoil in his mind. He ordered a coffee, trying to calm his nerves. Mariana walked in a few minutes later, her expression guarded. She was petite, with dark hair pulled back into a ponytail and eyes that seemed too old for her young face. Lucas stood up as she approached, giving her a small, tentative smile. "Hi, Mariana," he said, motioning for her to sit down. "Thanks for meeting me." She nodded and sat across from him, her eyes scanning the menu without really seeing it. "You said you wanted to talk about Daniel," she said, her voice flat. Lucas took a deep breath. "Yes. Before he passed, he made me promise to take care of you." Mariana's eyes flickered with something, anger, maybe, or perhaps sorrow. "I don't need anyone to take care of me," she replied, her tone defensive. "I can manage on my own." "I know you're strong," Lucas said gently. "But sometimes, it's okay to let someone help. Daniel was worried about you. He didn't want you to be alone." Her shoulders slumped slightly, the defiance in her eyes dimming. "It's just, everything's so messed up right now," she admitted. "I don't even know where to start." "Then let me help you," Lucas said. "We can figure it out together." They sat in silence for a moment, the diner's clatter and chatter filling the space between them. Finally, Mariana nodded. "Okay," she said softly. "But I won't be a burden. I need to handle my own problems too." Lucas smiled, feeling a small sense of relief. "I understand. We'll take it one step at a time." As they left the diner, Lucas felt the first stirrings of hope. It wouldn't be easy, but at least Mariana was willing to let him in. Together, they could face whatever challenges lay ahead, and maybe, just maybe, find a way to heal from their shared loss. Lucas and Mariana's first days working together were anything but smooth. Despite her initial agreement to accept his help, Mariana's independent streak quickly resurfaced, and Lucas found himself navigating a minefield of resistance and pride. One morning, Lucas arrived at Mariana's small apartment, a modest space that reflected her minimalist lifestyle. The paint was peeling in some corners, and the furniture was old but functional. He knocked on the door, and after a moment, Mariana opened it, her face set in a determined expression. "Morning," Lucas greeted, trying to keep his tone light. "I thought we could start looking at your finances today. See if there's anything we can sort out." Mariana hesitated, then stepped aside to let him in. "Fine, but I don't want any charity," she said firmly. "I'll pay you back every cent." Lucas nodded, respecting her resolve. "It's not charity. Just a friend helping another friend." They sat at the small kitchen table, papers spread out before them. Bills, bank statements, and a few unopened letters from creditors painted a grim picture. Lucas could see the strain in Mariana's eyes as they went through the documents. "This is worse than I thought," Lucas admitted after an hour of sorting through the mess. "But it's not hopeless. We just need a plan." Mariana sighed, rubbing her temples. "I never realized how much debt Daniel had. I thought he was managing everything fine." Lucas reached out, touching her hand gently. "It's not your fault. We'll figure this out." As they continued to work, the doorbell rang. Mariana's expression darkened as she got up to answer it. Lucas could hear the muffled voices at the door, and then a harsh, familiar voice cut through the air. "What the hell is he doing here?" It was Mariana's ex-boyfriend, Mike. Lucas stood up, moving towards the door. Mariana blocked Mike's path, her body tense. "He's helping me." "Just leave, Mike." Mike's eyes flicked to Lucas, a sneer on his face. "So this is the new guy? Thought you said you didn't need anyone's help, Mariana." Lucas stepped forward, his voice calm but firm. "You need to leave, Mike. Mariana doesn't want you here." Mike laughed, but it was a cold, humorless sound. "You think you can just step in and take over? She's mine, and I won't let some wannabe hero come in and mess things up." Before the situation could escalate, Mariana closed the door on Mike, locking it behind her. She turned to Lucas, her face pale but resolute. "He won't be back," she said, though the tremor in her voice suggested otherwise. Lucas knew better than to argue. "Let's get back to work," he said, guiding her back to the table. But as they resumed their efforts, the encounter with Mike lingered in the air, a reminder of the threats that loomed over them. By the end of the day, they had a rough plan for addressing the financial issues. It wasn't perfect, but it was a start. As Lucas left, he looked back at Mariana, who seemed both stronger and more fragile than he had ever seen her. "We'll get through this," he promised. "Together." Mariana nodded, a faint smile on her lips. "Thanks, Lucas." As he walked away, Lucas couldn't help but feel a mix of hope and dread. The path ahead was fraught with obstacles, but he was determined to keep his promise, no matter what it took. Over the next few weeks, Lucas and Mariana developed a routine. Each morning, Lucas would stop by her apartment, and they would work through her financial troubles together. Despite the tension and the constant worry, there were moments of connection that began to strengthen their bond. One crisp autumn morning, Lucas arrived at Mariana's apartment to find her already up, a pot of coffee brewing. She greeted him with a genuine smile, a rare sight that warmed his heart. "Morning," Lucas said, taking a seat at the kitchen table. "Ready to tackle today's challenges?" Mariana poured 2 mugs of coffee and joined him. "As ready as I'll ever be," she replied, her tone lighter than usual. "But first, I thought we could take a break and go for a walk. Clear our heads a bit." Lucas agreed, and soon they were strolling through the small park near her apartment. The trees were a riot of color, their leaves creating a vivid tapestry against the clear blue sky. The crisp air was refreshing, and for a moment, they could forget their worries. "It's beautiful here," Lucas said, looking around. "I can see why you like this park." Mariana nodded, her eyes distant. "Daniel and I used to come here a lot. It's one of the few places that still feels safe." They walked in companionable silence for a while, the sound of their footsteps mingling with the rustle of leaves. Lucas noticed a small playground at the park's edge and smiled. "Remember when we used to race to the swings as kids?" he asked, a hint of nostalgia in his voice. Mariana chuckled. "I always let you win," she admitted. "Daniel would get so competitive." Lucas laughed. He always did hate losing. As they continued their walk, Lucas felt the tension between them easing. They were beginning to share more about their lives, their memories, and their hopes. It wasn't just about solving problems anymore, it was about rebuilding trust and finding comfort in each other's company. Back at Mariana's apartment, they settled into their work, but the atmosphere was noticeably lighter. Lucas could see the difference in Mariana's demeanor. She was opening up, allowing herself to rely on him more. That evening, as they wrapped up their tasks, Lucas noticed the time. "It's getting late. How about we order some takeout?" "My treat." Mariana hesitated but then nodded. "All right, but only if you let me pick the place." They ended up ordering from a local Chinese restaurant, and as they waited for their food, they talked about their favorite dishes and shared stories from their childhood. It was the most relaxed Lucas had seen Mariana since Daniel's death. When the food arrived, they ate together at the kitchen table, their conversation flowing easily. Lucas realized that he was looking forward to these moments, to the growing connection between them. He couldn't deny the feelings that were starting to develop, but he pushed them aside, focusing on the promise he had made. As he left that night, Lucas paused at the door. "Mariana, I know things have been tough, but I want you to know I'm here for you. Not just because of the promise, but because I care about you." Mariana looked at him, her eyes softening. "Thank you, Lucas. That means a lot to me." He nodded and left, his heart lighter than it had been in weeks. The challenges were far from over, but for the first time, he felt like they had a real chance at overcoming them. Together. The following week brought a new set of challenges. As Lucas and Mariana delved deeper into her financial situation, they discovered just how dire things were. The debts Daniel had left behind were substantial, and creditors were beginning to call more frequently, each conversation a stark reminder of the precariousness of their situation. One morning, as Lucas reviewed another stack of bills, he glanced up at Mariana. She was sitting across from him, her face etched with worry. "We need to come up with a solid plan," he said, his voice firm. "Something that can get us out of this hole." Mariana nodded, her expression resolute. "I know. I've been thinking about getting a second job. It's not ideal, but it might help." Lucas frowned. "You already have a full-time job. Adding more hours will only exhaust you." "I don't see another way," Mariana replied, her voice tinged with frustration. "We need money, and we need it fast." Lucas leaned back in his chair, thinking. There might be another option. "Have you thought about selling the house?" Mariana's eyes widened in shock. "Sell the house? That's all I have left of Daniel and our parents." "I understand," Lucas said gently. "But holding on to it might be what's keeping you trapped. We could find a smaller place, something more manageable." Mariana looked down at her hands, silent for a long moment. "I'll think about it," she finally said, her voice barely above a whisper. That evening, Lucas visited his mother to discuss the situation. She greeted him with a worried expression, clearly aware of the toll this was taking on him. "How are things going with Mariana?" she asked, pouring him a cup of tea. "It's tough, Mom," Lucas admitted. "Her financial situation is worse than we thought. We're considering all options, including selling the house." His mother sighed, sitting down across from him. "It's a difficult decision, but sometimes you have to make sacrifices to move forward. Just make sure she's not feeling pressured into it." Lucas nodded, appreciating her advice. "I will." I just want to help her get back on her feet. The next day, Lucas returned to Mariana's apartment with renewed determination. I've been thinking, he began, maybe we can start by cutting down on some expenses. There are a few programs and charities that might be able to help with the immediate bills. Mariana looked relieved. That sounds more doable than selling the house right now. Let's try that first. Together, they worked through the applications for financial assistance, making calls and filling out forms. It was a slow process, but each small victory brought them closer to stability. As they worked late into the night, Mariana suddenly put down her pen and looked at Lucas. "Why are you doing all this?" she asked, her voice soft. "You barely knew me before all this happened." Lucas paused, searching for the right words. "Because I made a promise to Daniel," he said simply. "But also because I've come to care about you. You're not just a responsibility to me, Mariana. You're a friend." She smiled, a genuine warmth in her eyes. "Thank you, Lucas. I don't know what I'd do without you." As Lucas left that night, he felt a mixture of hope and anxiety. The road ahead was still uncertain, but they were making progress. And more importantly, they were facing it together, one step at a time. The financial aid and assistance programs provided some temporary relief, but the specter of debt still loomed large over Mariana and Lucas. One evening, as they were organizing paperwork, the doorbell rang. Mariana's face tensed as she looked toward the door. "I'll get it," Lucas said, standing up. He opened the door to find Mike standing there, his posture aggressive and eyes full of malice. "What do you want, Mike?" Lucas asked, keeping his voice calm but firm. Mike pushed past Lucas and stepped into the apartment. "I came to see Mariana," he said, his tone dripping with menace. Mariana appeared in the doorway to the kitchen, her face pale but resolute. "You need to leave, Mike. I told you we're done." Mike sneered. "You think this loser can protect you? You're mine, Mariana. You always will be." Lucas stepped between them, his heart pounding. "She asked you to leave. You need to respect that." Mike laughed, a cold, harsh sound. "Or what? What are you going to do about it?" Before Lucas could respond, Mike lunged at him, shoving him against the wall. The force of the impact knocked the wind out of Lucas, but he quickly regained his footing. He knew he had to stand his ground, not just for his sake, but for Mariana's. "Get out, Mike," Lucas said, his voice steady despite the adrenaline coursing through him. "This isn't about you. It's about Mariana, and she doesn't want you here." Mike's eyes flashed with anger, but before he could make another move, Mariana stepped forward, her voice strong and clear. "Leave, Mike. Now. Or I'll call the police." For a moment, it looked like Mike might ignore her, but then he smirked and backed off. "This isn't over," he said, glaring at Lucas before turning and leaving the apartment. The door closed behind him with a heavy thud, and the room fell into an uneasy silence. Lucas turned to Mariana, who was visibly shaken but trying to stay composed. "Are you okay?" Lucas asked, stepping closer to her. Mariana nodded, though her hands were trembling. I think so. Thank you, Lucas. I don't know what would have happened if you weren't here." Lucas gently placed his hands on her shoulders, offering comfort. "We're in this together, remember? You're not alone." She took a deep breath, trying to steady herself. I hate that he can still get to me like this." "He's trying to intimidate you, but you stood up to him," Lucas said softly. "That's a big step." Mariana managed a small smile. "I guess so. But I'm scared, Lucas. What if he comes back?" Lucas's eyes hardened with resolve. "We'll be ready. And we'll get through this, no matter what." That night, Lucas stayed on the couch, keeping watch to ensure Mike wouldn't return. As the hours passed, his mind raced with thoughts of how to protect Mariana and keep his promise. The encounter with Mike had shaken him, but it had also strengthened his determination. By morning, the tension had eased slightly, though the threat of Mike still hung in the air. Lucas knew they needed a more permanent solution, but for now, the immediate danger had passed. "Thank you for staying," Mariana said as they shared a quiet breakfast. "I feel a little safer with you here." Lucas smiled, though his mind was already working on their next steps. "Anytime, Mariana. We'll figure this out together." As he left to go to work, Lucas couldn't shake the feeling that the situation with Mike was far from over. But for now, they had survived the first threat. And that, at least, was a small victory. Despite the immediate threat of Mike being temporarily subdued, Lucas knew they needed to dig deeper into the circumstances surrounding Daniel's deaths. Something about the situation didn't add up, and Lucas had a nagging feeling that there were more secrets to uncover. One afternoon, while Mariana was at work, Lucas decided to visit Daniel's old apartment. The landlord had given him permission to go through Daniel's things, and Lucas hoped he might find some clues that could shed light on the situation. The apartment was small and sparsely furnished, a stark reminder of Daniel's modest lifestyle. As Lucas sifted through papers and personal items, he stumbled upon a locked drawer in Daniel's desk. After some searching, he found the key taped to the underside of a drawer. Inside, he discovered a stack of letters, some photographs, and a small notebook. The letters were from various people, but one name stood out: Mike. Lucas's heart pounded as he read through the correspondence. It became clear that Mike had been involved in some shady dealings with Daniel. The notebook contained detailed records of transactions, debts, and meetings. It painted a picture of a man desperate to keep his head above water, resorting to dangerous and illegal activities to stay afloat. One letter, in particular, caught Lucas's eye. It was from a man named Frank, who seemed to be a key player in the transactions. The letter was a threat, warning Daniel to pay up or face severe consequences. Lucas felt a chill run down his spine. This was bigger than he had imagined. Armed with this new information, Lucas knew he had to share it with Mariana. That evening, he met her at her apartment, the gravity of what he had discovered weighing heavily on his mind. "Mariana, we need to talk," he said, his voice serious. She looked up from the paperwork they had been sorting through, sensing the urgency in his tone. "What is it, Lucas?" "I went to Daniel's apartment today," he began. "I found some letters and a notebook. It seems like Daniel was involved in some pretty dangerous stuff. He was working with Mike and a man named Frank. They were threatening him." Mariana's face went pale as she absorbed the information. "I had no idea," she whispered. "Why didn't he tell me?" Lucas shook his head. "He was probably trying to protect you. But now that we know, we need to be extra careful. Mike isn't just a personal threat, he's part of something much bigger." Mariana sat down, her hands trembling. "What are we going to do, Lucas? How do we get out of this?" Lucas took her hands in his grip firm and reassuring. "We'll find a way. We need to dig deeper, find out who this Frank guy is and what exactly we're up against. And we need to stay strong, for Daniel and for ourselves." As they talked late into the night, Lucas felt their bond grow stronger. They were united by their determination to uncover the truth and protect each other from the dangers lurking in the shadows. The secrets they had uncovered were just the beginning, but they were ready to face whatever came next. By the time Lucas left, the first light of dawn was breaking. He walked away with a sense of purpose, knowing that the battle was far from over, but also feeling more connected to Mariana than ever. Together, they would uncover the secrets of Daniel's past and confront the threats that loomed over them. The following day, Lucas knew they needed more than just each other to tackle the growing threats. He decided to seek out an old friend who had a knack for dealing with trouble, Mark, a former police officer who now worked as a private investigator. Mark had always been good at digging up information and navigating dangerous waters. Lucas met Mark at a local coffee shop. The place was quiet, the air filled with the rich aroma of freshly brewed coffee. Mark was already there, a steaming cup in front of him. He looked up as Lucas approached, a curious smile on his face. Lucas, it's been a while, Mark said, standing to shake his hand. What brings you here? Lucas took a seat, feeling a mix of relief and apprehension. I need your help, Mark. It's about Daniel. Mark's expression turned serious. I heard about his death. I'm sorry. What do you need? Lucas explained everything: Daniel's debts, the threats from Mike and Frank, and the hidden notebook detailing the dangerous dealings. Mark listened intently, nodding occasionally. This is serious, Mark said finally. But I think I can help. We need to find out more about Frank and his operation. If we can get some leverage, maybe we can keep Mariana safe. That's what I was hoping, Lucas said. But we need to be careful. These guys are dangerous. Mark nodded. I'll start digging. In the meantime, keep an eye on Mariana. I'll contact you as soon as I have something. Lucas left the coffee shop feeling a glimmer of hope. Mark was one of the best, and if anyone could uncover the truth, it was him. Back at Mariana's apartment, he found her sorting through more papers, her face etched with concentration. When he told her about meeting Mark, she looked relieved. It's good to know we have someone on our side, she said. But what do we do in the meantime? We stay vigilant, Lucas replied. And we keep looking for anything that might help us understand what we're up against. The days passed slowly, each one filled with a mix of mundane tasks and constant vigilance. Lucas and Mariana continued to work on her finances, but the shadow of the looming threats never fully lifted. One evening, as they were going through more paperwork, Lucas's phone buzzed. It was Mark. I've got something, Mark said, his voice urgent. Meet me at my office in an hour. Lucas's heart raced. I'll be there. He told Mariana about the call, and she insisted on coming with him. They arrived at Mark's office, a small but well-organized space filled with files and photographs. Mark greeted them at the door, his expression serious. I did some digging, Mark began, leading them to his desk. Frank is a major player in the local crime scene. Drugs, extortion, you name it. Daniel got in deep with him, probably out of desperation. He laid out several documents and photographs. This is Frank, he said, pointing to a picture of a stern-looking man in his 40s. He's bad news. But I found something else. It looks like Daniel was gathering evidence against him. Maybe he was trying to find a way out. Lucas and Mariana exchanged glances. Evidence? Against Frank? Lucas asked. Mark nodded. It's risky, but if we can find that evidence, we might have a way to keep Frank off your backs. Mariana looked at the photographs, her expression a mix of fear and determination. We have to find it, she said. For Daniel. Lucas agreed. Where do we start? Mark handed them a list of locations where Daniel had been seen frequently before his death. These are places Daniel visited often. Start there. I'll keep digging on my end and see if I can find more leads. As they left Mark's office, Lucas felt a renewed sense of purpose. The path ahead was fraught with danger, but they now had a direction, a goal that could bring them closer to safety and justice for Daniel. Together, Lucas and Mariana began their search, each step bringing them closer to the truth and each other. The alliance they had formed was their best hope against the darkness that threatened to consume them. The search for Daniel's hidden evidence took Lucas and Mariana to places neither of them had ever expected to visit. Each location on Mark's list held clues, but nothing definitive. They were growing weary, but their determination kept them moving forward. One evening, they found themselves at an old warehouse on the outskirts of town. It was a dilapidated building, long abandoned, with broken windows and graffiti-covered walls. According to Mark, Daniel had been seen here multiple times before his death. This place gives me the creeps, Mariana said, her voice echoing in the empty space as they stepped inside. Me too, Lucas replied, his flashlight cutting through the darkness. But if Daniel was here, there must be a reason. They searched the warehouse meticulously, sifting through old crates and piles of debris. Hours passed with no sign of anything useful. Just as they were about to give up, Lucas's flashlight caught a glint of metal behind a stack of old wooden pallets. "Over here," he called to Mariana, who hurried over. They moved the pallets aside to reveal a small metal box, hidden away from plain sight. Lucas pried it open, revealing a collection of documents, a flash drive, and several photographs. The documents were records of transactions and meetings, implicating Frank and his associates in various illegal activities. "This is it," Mariana whispered, her eyes wide with a mix of fear and hope. "This is what Daniel was hiding." Before Lucas could respond, the sound of footsteps echoed through the warehouse. They turned to see Mike and two other men standing in the entrance, blocking their way out. Well, what do we have here?" Mike sneered, his eyes cold and calculating. "I knew you'd come sniffing around eventually." Lucas stepped in front of Mariana, shielding her from Mike's view. "We found what we were looking for, Mike. It's over." Mike laughed, a harsh, grating sound. "You think this is over? You're in way over your heads, both of you. Hand over the box, and maybe I'll let you walk out of here." Lucas tightened his grip on the box. "No. This ends now. We have enough evidence to put Frank and all of you away for a long time." Mike's expression darkened, and he took a threatening step forward. "You really don't know who you're dealing with, do you?" Before Mike could make another move, the sound of sirens filled the air. The police, alerted by Mark, who had been monitoring the situation from a distance, arrived just in time. Officers stormed the warehouse, guns drawn, quickly subduing Mike and his men. Mark entered the warehouse, a relieved smile on his face. "You two okay?" he asked, approaching Lucas and Mariana. Lucas nodded, handing the box to Mark. "We found it. This should be enough to take Frank down." Mark took the box, examining the contents briefly before nodding. "Good job. You both did great." As the police led Mike and his associates away, Lucas turned to Mariana. "It's finally over," he said, relief flooding his voice. Mariana smiled, tears of relief and gratitude in her eyes. "Thank you, Lucas. I couldn't have done this without you." They walked out of the warehouse together, the weight of the past few weeks lifting from their shoulders. They had faced their fears and come out stronger on the other side. That night, back at Mariana's apartment, they sat together, reflecting on everything that had happened. Lucas reached out and took Mariana's hand, a sense of peace settling over them. "We did it," he said softly. "For Daniel." Mariana nodded, leaning her head on his shoulder. "For Daniel," she echoed. As they sat in the quiet of the apartment, they knew that while the immediate danger had passed, their journey was far from over. But whatever the future held, they would face it together, bound by the promise that had brought them closer than they ever imagined. With Mike and his associates behind bars, Lucas and Mariana felt a sense of temporary relief. The evidence they had found was more than enough to implicate Frank and bring his criminal activities to light. However, Lucas couldn't shake the feeling that there was still more to uncover. A few days after the confrontation at the warehouse, Mark called Lucas and asked him to meet at his office. Mariana insisted on coming along, eager to know what new developments had arisen. When they arrived, Mark was waiting with a serious expression. "I've been going through the evidence you found," he said, gesturing for them to sit. "There's something you both need to see." Mark pulled out the flash drive they had discovered in the metal box and inserted it into his computer. The screen filled with a series of documents and videos. As they watched, it became clear that Daniel had been secretly recording his meetings with Frank and his associates. The footage was damning, showing not only illegal transactions but also conversations about extortion and threats. But it was one video in particular that caught their attention. In it, Daniel was speaking to Frank in a heated argument. "You think you can just walk away?" Frank snarled. "You're in this for life, Daniel. There's no escaping." Daniel stood his ground, defiant. "I have everything I need to bring you down, Frank. One wrong move, and it'll all go public." Frank laughed coldly. You wouldn't dare. You have too much to lose. The video ended abruptly, leaving Lucas and Mariana in stunned silence. He was trying to get out, Mariana whispered, her eyes filling with tears. Daniel was gathering all this to take Frank down. Mark nodded. It looks like Daniel was trying to protect you, Mariana. He knew how dangerous Frank was and wanted to ensure you were safe. Lucas clenched his fists, anger and sadness mixing in his chest. He paid the ultimate price for trying to do the right thing. Mark sighed. There's more. I've been following a trail from the documents, and I think I found out why Daniel got involved with Frank in the first place. He handed Lucas a folder. Inside were medical bills, hospital records, and a letter from a doctor. Daniel was diagnosed with a rare and aggressive illness a few years ago. The treatments were expensive, and he didn't want to burden Mariana with the costs. That's why he turned to Frank. Mariana gasped, her face going pale. He never told me. He kept it all to himself. He was trying to protect you, Mark said softly. In the end, everything he did was for you. Lucas felt a pang of guilt and sorrow. Daniel had sacrificed so much, and they had only just begun to understand the extent of his struggles. We need to make sure his sacrifice wasn't in vain, he said firmly. We have to take this evidence to the authorities. Mark agreed. I'll handle that. You two should lay low for a while, just in case. As they left Mark's office, Lucas and Mariana were filled with a renewed sense of purpose. They had uncovered the truth about Daniel's actions and the reasons behind his desperate choices. Now, it was up to them to honor his memory by ensuring that justice was served. That evening, back at Mariana's apartment, they sat together, the weight of the revelations pressing down on them. He really loved you, Mariana, Lucas said softly. Everything he did was to keep you safe. Mariana nodded, tears streaming down her face. I just wish I could have helped him more. I wish he had told me. Lucas held her close, offering what comfort he could. We'll make sure his story is told. And we'll make sure Frank pays for everything he's done. As they sat in the quiet of the apartment, they knew their journey was far from over. But with the truth now in the open, they were ready to face whatever came next, united by their love for Daniel and their determination to see justice done. The evidence gathered from Daniel's secret recordings and documents was more than enough to build a strong case against Frank. Mark had handed everything over to the authorities, and an investigation was launched. The town buzzed with rumors and speculations as news of the impending crackdown on Frank's criminal empire spread. Lucas and Mariana, however, were not out of danger yet. They had decided to lay low, but it seemed that Frank had other plans. One evening, as they were preparing dinner, a loud crash echoed through the apartment. Lucas and Mariana froze, their eyes meeting in a moment of shared fear. Stay here, Lucas whispered, grabbing a kitchen knife for protection. He moved cautiously toward the living room, where the noise had come from. The front door had been forced open, and standing in the doorway was Frank, his face twisted with rage. Thought you could hide from me, did you? Frank snarled, advancing into the room. Lucas held the knife steady, his heart pounding. It's over, Frank. The police have everything they need to put you away. Frank laughed, a sinister sound that sent chills down Lucas's spine. You really think I care about the police? I've got nothing to lose. Mariana appeared at the entrance to the kitchen, her face pale but resolute. You need to leave, Frank. This ends now. Frank's eyes flicked to her, and he sneered. Ah, Mariana. Always the brave one. Your brother thought he could outsmart me, and look where they got him. Rage surged through Lucas at the mention of Daniel. He stepped forward, placing himself between Mariana and Frank. You're not going to hurt her, he said, his voice steady despite the fear gnawing at him. Before Frank could respond, the sound of police sirens filled the air. Mark had been keeping a close watch and had called for backup the moment Frank's whereabouts were known. The flashing blue lights reflected off the walls as officers stormed into the apartment, their weapons drawn. Frank hesitated, then made a desperate move to escape. Lucas lunged at him, tackling him to the ground. They struggled briefly, but the police quickly intervened, pulling Frank away and cuffing him. "It's over," one of the officers said, hauling Frank to his feet. "You're done." As Frank was led away, he cast a final, venomous look at Lucas and Mariana. "This isn't over," he spat. "Not by a long shot." Lucas watched as the police took Frank out of the apartment, his body trembling with adrenaline. He turned to Mariana, who was standing in the doorway, tears streaming down her face. He rushed to her, pulling her into a tight embrace. "It's over," he repeated, more for his own reassurance than anything else. "He's gone." Mariana clung to him, her body shaking with sobs. "Thank you, Lucas. I couldn't have done this without you." They stood there for a long time, holding each other as the reality of their victory sank in. They had faced down the monsters that had haunted them, and they had won. The road ahead was still uncertain, but they had each other, and that was enough. Later, as they sat together on the couch, exhausted but relieved, Lucas looked at Mariana. "We did it," he said softly. "For Daniel." Mariana nodded, a small smile breaking through her tears. "For Daniel." The police stayed for a while longer, taking statements and ensuring their safety. Mark arrived shortly after, his face a mix of relief and pride. "You both did great," he said, clapping Lucas on the shoulder. "Frank won't be able to hurt anyone anymore." Lucas nodded, gratitude flooding his heart. "Thanks, Mark. We couldn't have done it without you." Mark smiled. "Just doing my job. You two take care of each other." As the night wore on and the adrenaline began to fade, Lucas and Mariana felt a sense of peace they hadn't known in a long time. They had faced their fears and come out stronger on the other side. Together, they would build a new life, one free from the shadows of the past. In the days following Frank's arrest, the small town began to return to a semblance of normalcy. The news of the takedown of a major criminal network spread quickly, and Lucas and Mariana found themselves the center of attention and admiration. People came up to them in the street, thanking them for their bravery. Lucas, however, was more focused on ensuring Mariana's safety and rebuilding their lives. With the immediate threat gone, they could finally take the time to heal and plan for the future. One morning, as they sat together on Mariana's porch, sipping coffee and enjoying the quiet, Lucas broached a topic that had been on his mind. "I've been thinking," he began, looking out at the street where children played and neighbors chatted, "about what we should do next." Mariana turned to him, her expression curious. "What do you mean?" "Well," Lucas said, choosing his words carefully, "we've been through a lot. Maybe it's time for a fresh start. Somewhere new, where we can leave all this behind and focus on the future." Mariana considered this for a moment, then nodded slowly. "I've been thinking the same thing. This town has too many memories, both good and bad. Maybe a new place would help us move on." They spent the next few weeks making plans. With the sale of Daniel's house and the resolution of the financial issues, they had enough to start over. They decided on a small town a few hours away, close enough to visit their roots, but far enough to build a new life. The move was bittersweet. Saying goodbye to the place they had known all their lives was hard, but the promise of a fresh start kept them going. The new home was a cozy cottage with a small garden, perfect for starting anew. One evening, as they unpacked boxes in their new living room, Mariana found an old photo of Daniel. She sat down, holding the picture gently, tears welling up in her eyes. Lucas sat beside her, placing a comforting arm around her shoulders. "He would be proud of you, Mariana. Everything you've done, everything you've been through, you did it with strength and courage." Mariana nodded, wiping away her tears. "I just wish you were here to see it." "He is," Lucas said softly. "In every decision we make, and every step we take, he's with us." They finished unpacking and sat together on the porch, watching the sun set over their new neighborhood. The sense of peace and possibility was overwhelming. "I feel like we can finally breathe," Mariana said, leaning her head on Lucas's shoulder. "Me too," Lucas replied, feeling the same sense of relief. We have a chance to build something new, something good. As the days turned into weeks, Lucas and Mariana settled into their new life. They found jobs, made new friends, and slowly but surely, the wounds of the past began to heal. They often talked about Daniel, keeping his memory alive in their hearts. One evening, as they walked through their garden, Lucas turned to Mariana. "You know, I never thought a simple promise would lead to all of this." Mariana smiled, her eyes reflecting the setting sun. "It's more than a promise now. It's our life, our future. And it's a good one." Lucas took her hand, feeling the strength of their bond. "Whatever comes next, we'll face it together." Mariana squeezed his hand, her smile widening. Together. As they stood there, looking out at the horizon, they knew that no matter what challenges lay ahead, they had the strength and the love to face them. The past had shaped them, but the future was theirs to create. Epilogue ***. Several months later, Lucas and Mariana sat in their garden, watching the flowers they had planted bloom. Life had taken on a new rhythm, one filled with hope and happiness. They had faced the darkness together and emerged stronger for it. A letter arrived one morning, a reminder of the past they had left behind. It was from Mark, updating them on the final sentencing of Frank and his associates. Justice had been served, and the town was safer because of their bravery. As they read the letter together, Lucas and Mariana felt a sense of closure. The chapter of their lives that had been filled with danger and uncertainty was finally over. They had honored Daniel's memory and kept their promise to protect each other. Now, with the future wide open before them, they were ready to embrace whatever came next, knowing that their love and determination would see them through. The promise that had started it all had led them to a new beginning, one filled with endless possibilities and the unbreakable bond of two souls who had faced the storm and found peace on the other side.